All right, how y'all doing today? Been well? All right. I'm James Snell with nearForm and the Node TSC. I basically get to work on Node all the time. It's fantastic. I don't actually do much with Node. I get to work on Node itself, which is lots of fun. So I think this is what the fourth or fifth interactive event, and everyone I've kind of gone through kind of the state of the project, what's happening in the project, what are some of the big things that we're working on, and also kind of look back at some of the activity, the stats, and what is happening within the project as a whole. And this is probably the one that I want to focus on most this year. We've had over 3,500 pull requests so far this year. Which comes out to about 85 a week. The activity has been absolutely phenomenal. The thing about that is we're actually down from last year. The project has slowed down. When I put this slide deck originally at the beginning of the week, I put some numbers in there. I had to update it this morning because we went up by about another 50 or 60 pull requests. So that's fun. About 1,900 issues open this year. We've landed about 3,200 commits. We've added almost about 250 new contributors. We'll see how many more we add at the Code and Learn tomorrow. Last year we had a huge amount. It was like the highest number of new pull requests ever opened in the project in a single day at the Code and Learn last year. So we'll see if we can top that this year. I think I saw Rich Trott out there. He's been doing a fantastic job of pulling it together and organizing those. So. Every change tested on 55 operating system and architecture combinations. Our CI environment, it's quite massive, and it's almost all on donated infrastructure. We have Mac machines somewhere. We have a whole bank of Raspberry Pis in Rodbag's garage that are running these things. The entire CI infrastructure is quite large, and we engage this thing multiple times per day, running several thousand tests every single time for any change. It's just constantly churning through. For the past couple of months, we've had some issues with it being red. The team has done a fantastic job of actually getting that, keeping that up and running. We're green now, so we're good. But in this activity, what you notice, in this charts that are pulled from GitHub, you can see that this year, about mid-year, the activity dropped. So we've had, ever since we launched the foundation, we've had this steady increase of activity, and all of a sudden it drops. It's kind of, what's happening there? If you look at the actual dates for that drop immediately comes after the Node 10 release. So there was, right after Node 10 came out, there was some activity, then it falls off. Well, I was going back and analyzing the actual commits that are happening. It's because everyone is focusing on kind of deeper problems. So there's fewer smaller commits that are happening. It's kind of larger things that are going, larger strategic initiatives. So I actually see that as being a healthy sign because I don't think that growth has been necessarily sustainable. I don't think we want to see 85 pull requests coming in every week. But we are seeing steady activity, steady growth, and we're maintaining the project. So that's fantastic. We're at 95% test coverage in JavaScript, 91% in C++. If you like doing tests, I'm sure Trott would love this if we can get these numbers higher. If we can, come help us improve our test coverage, it'd be fantastic. We've had 15 releases of Node 10 this year, 8 for both 8 and 6. Again, I put this slide together earlier this week and had to bump it up. We just had a new Node 10 release yesterday, so go install that and have some fun with that. 10 will be going into LTS this month. It should be the new target that you all are baselining on. And 11 will be coming out on the 23rd. The thing with 11 is it's not a lot of change there. It's actually a fairly small release. This is one of the interesting stats I was looking at. This shows the growth in semver major or breaking changes we've had in the project since 4.0, right? So in 4, I think we had like 19 breaking semver major changes, right? In 10, we had just over 300 semver major changes. And it's interesting the pattern there that we're seeing, for 7, 9, and 11, it's a smaller number. Those node releases aren't as supported as long. But we're seeing the ones that are going into LTS, that's where we see the most breaking changes actually happening, and it's holding up consistently over time. So this is an interesting trend, and I'm not quite sure what to make of this, but I'm very happy to see that the number of breaking changes are down in 11 versus 10. 10 was an absolutely massive release. Okay. But what have we been working on? Yeah, so we have all this activity, we have all these commits, but it doesn't really kind of break down what specifically we've been doing. Now, Franziska talked a little bit about some of these new features that are there yesterday. There's been a couple of talks. I know Miles is doing a talk right next door talking about modules and the current state of that right now. I want to kind of talk about the high-level strategic initiatives. So I don't want to go into a lot of detail on these, but provide some surface coverage of what we're doing here. HP2 is probably one of the biggest ones. It's the largest new addition to Node that's been there for a while for not looking at modules, which is still coming. It's now stable. It's out there. You can use it. Covered by Semver rules. It's at a state now where you actually can start putting it into production. And the fun thing there is we received our first major production bug report a couple of weeks ago, which means, yeah, somebody's actually using it. Sorry we broke you, but they're actually using it. We've fixed that issue. But it's ready to go start writing some code, and very excited to see what folks do with this. One of the open questions with HP2 though has always been, yes, there's performance improvements that can be had here, but what can we do with it? Well, until we actually had the API and implementation available, we couldn't actually answer that question, right? So, we have to actually make it available for people to use. So folks ask me all the time, what are the use cases for this? I don't know. You tell me. I'd love to come back next year and see some talks on, hey, we used HP2 for this or that or whatever. The other day, we had a meetup down at the Microsoft office Tuesday night, and I was showing off, we just enabled the basic functionality to allow WebSockets over HTTP2 is now enabled in core. There's a few things that we needed to enable at the protocol level in the internals. We don't have the actual WebSocket support, that protocol. You have to use the WS module still, and there are still some bugs between the integration there that need to be worked out. But you can get WebSockets now working with HP2. The demo I was showing the other day was, I was able to have 5 simultaneous WebSockets going over a single HP connection, which was phenomenal. And we were able to multiplex regular HTTP traffic over that exact same connection while the WebSockets were going. So it's some pretty interesting things, but the use cases are really what are going to start coming out from this point forward. So again, please go off and use it and let us know what you do with it. We also got alt service and origin frames in there. We've been squashing a bunch of bugs and improving performance. We're seeing about a 10x performance improvement because of reduced latency, and particularly when it comes to connection management. So that's what we're seeing in benchmarks. We'd love to find out if that's what you're seeing in production as well. So. Something else, and this is probably one of the most exciting ones for me, is worker support. I don't know if Anna is here. It was funny, some people have looked at workers, enable multi-threading in Node before and came to the conclusion it can't be done. I think it was about a year ago, just about a year ago, Anna mentioned that she was going to be working on this, and I said, well, other people have done this, and they run into roadblocks, and she's just like, well, I don't care. It's just going to work. So. And then it was a few months later, there it is, and it just worked. So this is absolutely phenomenal. Every worker has its own event loop. There is message port. It uses message passing back and forth, so post message, on message for communicating. When you launch the thread, you can pass a little bit of data to it initially. There's still some quirks and stuff being worked out. How do we what's the best way to share data back and forth between these things? We can use the shared array buffer and that kind of stuff, but we're still figuring out kind of what the best practices are and what this API needs to be. It's not exactly like it works in the browser. Right now, it's as close as it can be, and hopefully it will get closer. But there are some differences here. But this is something that is there. It's experimental, hopefully. The way that it's going now, I fully expect it to come out of experimental in Node 11. So sometime before now and next April, when Node 12 comes out, we should be able to stabilize this. There's a couple things we need to do there. First there is we need folks to actually use it, and we need proof that it can actually work in production environments, that kind of thing. So we typically say we have a smoke testing environment called Canary in the Gold Mine. We need something in there that's using it that we can make sure that as we make changes, we don't break it, that kind of stuff. So there's some milestones we need to hit, but this is really coming along fast, and Anna deserves a huge amount of credit for just pushing this through and getting this working. So some things we've been looking at that, adding to that, shared and exclusive locks. There's the WebLocks API that's out there. It's not implemented by a lot of folks yet, but it's out there. It's being worked on, and it makes a lot of sense. Allows us to do locking without tying up the event loop, which is phenomenal. Enabling inspector support. Right now, the debug mechanisms for doing, for workers are. I mean, you can, but it's not great. Proving the API, and again, it should be able to graduate fairly soon. So that's a nice one. NAPI is something, another one that I'm sure you've heard about so far at the conference right now. So if you're doing anybody doing native modules, add-on development, so a few hands, use NAPI. This is the target you should be using. And the reason for that is it provides a stable layer that allows you to not have to recompile your add-on as you are upgrading Node, right? So it's a guaranteed ABI stability layer. There are some caveats to that. Like if you're using other libraries, you're binding other libraries like libuv or OpenSSL. If those change, you're still going to have to recompile. But this covers all of the core Node stuff, right? The team has done a phenomenal job on this. Where NAPI started from when Node Chakra first emerged, what they had to do is make Chakra look and act like V8. And we're starting to have some conversations about, well, how do we better support this ecosystem where you have Node on top of other engines, right? Especially when all of the module developers were also writing to those V8 APIs. How do we make sure that things don't break moving forward? We all, a bunch of us got together and decided, yes, this is what we want to support this, but we have no idea exactly how to do this without breaking the ecosystem. NAPI was one of the answers to that. Is we need developers to start writing to a stable ABI layer, and then we can start making the changes beneath that we need to support the multiple backends. And today we are seeing NAPI implementations for multiple backend JavaScript engines, not just V8, not just Chakra, but Jerry's script and some of these others as well. So it is coming along, and we're starting to realize that vision where we can have Node on multiple backend implementations. Now, whether we'll actually support, ship one of those as an official release or not is still up in the air, but that's the direction we're moving towards. Okay? So NAPI really gives that kind of more of a strategic view for those native modules. Eventually, we will work to a point where we are using an API within Node itself. Right now, all of our internal stuff is still using directly to those V8 APIs. But part of the vision here was this has to be something that we can use also. Tracing and diagnostics is another big one we've been focusing on. There's been a number of different efforts. LL Node is one. I know there was another talk on, I think, yesterday. There's trace events. Ali from Google Offerbots Online has been doing a tremendous amount of work on this within Core and in V8. We can emit trace events using the V8 format. We can enable that for V8 and for Node itself. We are working on instrumenting parts of Node to get this information out. We now have an API for turning this on and off at runtime. Before, you had to use a command line flag to enable this. Now you can turn them on and off. You can specify which categories does it go out to a file, and then you can, there's various tools you can use to analyze those files. Node Clinic is one of those. We'll take a look at this information and consume it. So there's tools that are being built already to start utilizing this information. We're looking at expanding the kinds of diagnostic information provided by Node, but this is something that it needs to be entirely use case driven. So HTTP2 is an example. I've gone through and started instrumenting HTTP2 probably 3 or 4 different times to enable trace events, only to stop and realize that there's so many different ways I can do this and so many different bits of information that could be useful but might not actually be useful, right? So we actually need to collect more use cases about how people want to analyze and debug the parts of Node so we know how to actually go through and instrument them. So it's going to take a while before we can get this done because we need that user feedback. All right. This is a nice one. Again, I believe this was with Anna, working with a couple others. The Node will now provide better information to dev tools when it comes to heap snapshots. Before, it was just kind of, I mean, there was information there. It was moderately useful. Now we're using the updated APIs provided by V8 itself to provide more detailed information within a heap snapshot of what Node is allocating and where Node is actually working. So when you do take the heap snapshots now, you'll get much, much better information, much more higher fidelity information. We're also doing better memory tracking within Node itself here. So we're getting much more detailed information out. Another one, again, this is Anna, added a Node debug native to Node. We had the Node debug environment variable there for a while, which gives us information about what's happening in the JavaScript side, but it didn't give us any insight whatsoever to what was happening into the native side of Node, right? And in order to get that information out, we had to recompile Node with a particular config option that enabled debug. Now the Node debug native environment variable will turn the debugging on at that, within the native parts of Node. Now it's not fully instrumented. There's like HTTP2 and maybe 1 or 2 others, the little subsystems that support this yet. But we're working on we will incrementally work on building this out so you can get more debug information out of Node itself. Okay. It's fairly low level at this point, and it's just there primarily for if you're developing on Node itself. But eventually, hopefully, we'll get to some better debug information that end users can find more useful. All right. There's also efforts underway to build Node Report directly into Node Core. Node Report is a module that originated from IBM, I think a year or so ago, that can provide a diagnostic report of kind of the current state of Node when a failure happened. It's a native add-on. They kind of tap into some of the internal bits of Node, and it works well, but it really makes much more sense to bake into Node itself. So there's a pull request right now. A lot of the details. It's a fairly complex integration. So the pull request has been there for a while, and we're working on getting it approved. But that should land relatively soon. And working to improve the trace event detail and usability. And there's been some significant bugs we found along the way there, so we're working on patching all that stuff up. ES6 modules are coming. I think I was here like 2 years ago talking about this. Like, hey, yeah, we're going to get this done by Node 10. Yeah, that didn't happen. There is now a working group that's actually focused on this, and they are making some progress. The experimental support for modules that's in core right now is actually being rolled back just a bit. The working group is focused on this, what they call a minimal kernel. So the stuff that's there now is fairly controversial in terms of how it was implemented. So in order to deal with the controversy, the group is saying, okay, let's step back and focus on the stuff we agree on, and we're going to do that. Right? And then they're going to go to the next layer and say, okay, what's the next round of things that we can get consensus on and go from there. And the thing that makes this most difficult in terms of how to implement this is that there's several different factors. ES6 modules work completely differently to CommonJS module system that's currently in Node. So it's a fundamentally different paradigm for how these things work. Okay? So there's that disconnect. There are all of the transpiler implementations of ES6 modules that are out there now that also, while they work, they diverge from the spec, right? So in order for Node to be able to implement this correctly, for some definition of correctly, is they have to reconcile both to the spec and to the transpilers without trying not to break either one of them, while making both groups happy as well. And that has proven to be extraordinarily difficult to do because certain things won't work. So the whole debate over the MJS extension, right? There's folks that just don't like the fact that they have to call their put a different file extension on their thing. But within Node, that's the way the loader works. So how do we actually reconcile this so that users don't revolt once we actually deploy something? Just answering questions like that has been extraordinarily difficult and has gone on for several years now. So they are coming. We are making progress, but it's going to take a little while longer. OK. We are getting promises support. Just like 3 years ago, if you ask people within Node Core, it's like, will we ever support promises in the core API? Or resounding choruses of, hell no, we'll never do that. But we've actually made progress. There is now the file system promises API and the DNS API. These are pretty much straightforward ports of the existing callback APIs. Now we're stopping here for now because we want users to get used to this, and we want to make sure we are doing it in the right way before we go off and do a wholesale conversion of all of Node's API. And also, there's some parts of the API that just don't make sense to convert. Some people were saying, well, just promisify everything. That doesn't actually work because not all of those APIs make sense to turn into promises. So we want to be very selective and make sure that we are doing this in a way that actually works. I do anticipate that FS promises will come out of experimental sometime in 11, so sometime over the next couple of months, that we should reach a point where that stabilizes to the point where you can move forward and just use it in production. DNS API will take a little longer. It was just recently introduced, and then we have to decide what's the next one after that that has priority. Okay. One of the other things that we're doing with promises, though, is trying to work on making them easier to use. So I do a lot of consulting work with clients, and clients will come to us and say, well, our application is slow. And one of the first things I ask now is, are you using promises? And if they say yes, without looking into the code, I say you're probably using them wrong, because they are actually quite difficult to use correctly. There's a lot of ways that you can just kind of shoot yourself in the foot with the Promise API. Not a lot of people are familiar with them, especially if you're coming from other programming environments like Java and .NET, and where async works differently, right? One of the things that's very easy to get wrong with promises is what's called multiple resolve. Now, with async await, this problem essentially goes away because the syntax is different, and you can't actually do this. But with promises themselves, when you have the resolve or reject, if you resolve twice, or if you reject, after you resolve, those kind of things, that second resolve will get swallowed, and you'll never see it. Right? There's no indication that this happened. And what we've seen is there's a lot of folks that are inadvertently having bugs in their code be completely hidden by the fact that there's no reporting on this. It just goes away into a black hole somewhere. So an example of this is if you have a switch statement, right, and you forget to put a break, right? If you're outside of the promises, there's ways you can catch this, you can see what's happening here. But if this is running within a promise, you just set the resolve. There's no impact, but you can actually cause resource leaks, a variety of different memory and performance problems by doing this. So Ruben Ridgewater added this multiple resolves event now that will tell you, hey, you rejected this thing twice, you resolved this thing twice. So we're working on and improving the feedback that Node itself is providing to you. We're still trying to figure out what to do with unhandled rejections. There's really no great answer on this, so we're trying to figure out the best bad answer. And this is just one that if you have an unhandled rejection, what the hell do you do, right? Some people say, crash immediately, we need all that context. Other people are saying, no, that's against the spec, so just ignore it. We have to find something that meets in the middle or allows us to make it configurable. We're improving web standards alignment. We actually have a new team, should be organizing into a working group soon, that will improve the way that we're working with organizations like TC39, WhatWG, that kind of thing. Here recently, text encoder and text decoder are now globals. Those are WhatWG APIs that we've implemented in core. WhatWG URL is global and is the thing you should be using for URL parsing in Node. If you are using URL parse or URL format, it's time to begin transitioning away from that. It is deprecated. There are a number of fairly serious logical issues with that code, particularly if you're parsing usernames and passwords and these kind of things. And those bugs will not get fixed, or there's no roadmap to fix them. And those things are, the fix was to use the new URL parser. So begin transitioning that code. We're using the new URL API within Node itself now, and everyone should begin transitioning that. We also have this new queue microtask. So how many folks have ever been confused by timing within Node, right? Process next tick, set immediate, that kind of thing. Well, we added a new one to add even more confusion. Queue microtask, it's a web platform API that allows you to insert a callback into the same microtask queue that promises use, right? So when you schedule a promise, that goes into a particular queue, right? That's independent of when you're using process next tick. So anytime you have some stack of JavaScript running, right? Everything in Node, there's a bit of C running underneath, and then you have the JavaScript that's run, right? Anytime control flows back from the JavaScript back into C, the process next tick queue is executed. So anything you've scheduled there, that gets emptied. The promises microtask queue gets run immediately after, right? Every time. What queue microtask does is it inserts into that queue rather than process next tick. So you have yet another thing to wonder about. I was going to throw up a little brain teaser. We don't have time for it though. About the execution order, figuring out the execution order. I'll post it on my Twitter later on. Without running the code, see if you can figure out the order of statement, the order that the statements are printed using all these timing things. But it's there. We have some investigation going into Fetch Streams API. I actually have an implementation of Fetch working in Node, but it uses Node's Streams API. I'm kind of afraid to open the PR because it's going to be a nightmare discussion. But we're figuring this out. We just had a PR that tried to add Streams API, and it ended up being a bit of a nightmare discussion. So we'll get there. This is a big one. Process binding is deprecated. If you're using this in your code, don't. Let us know why you're using it, and we'll add a supported public API that matches the use case. Process binding is an internal API. It's how Node's JavaScript talks to Node's C++ backend. It is not safe to use in user code. Like we do, for example, we'll do type checking in JavaScript, and if the types don't match at the C++ layer, it just aborts, right? If you are not using this API properly, and if you're not doing that type checking, then you're going to introduce seg faults and aborts in your code. Right? So it's not safe for you, for user code to make use of. But there's a ton of code out there that actually still is. So you need to begin transitioning away. And to do that, come talk to us about your specific use case so we can have a supported API for you. All right? Some other things we've done, proper command line parser, JavaScript code and C++ code being modernized, documentation being improved, CI being made greenish again. That one alone is worth cheering over for, a core, and we're improving coverage. Node 11 is largely a maintenance release. There's very few new features. Like I said, there's about 140 December major commits, but all of those are kind of internal refactoring. Very few of those actually affect most users. So that'll be fun, but again, that's going to be out on the 23rd. Node 10 will be moving to long-term support. I believe the date is October 31st for when that actually transitions. And we get to look forward for Node 12 in April 2019. Do you believe this time next year we'll be celebrating Node's 10th birthday? That's pretty exciting. That's going to be fun. We're going to have a cake. It'll be a hexagon cake. We have the Collaborator Summit over the next couple of days. We have the Code and Learn tomorrow. If you want to learn how to contribute to Node, come on out. I think we have something like 300 people already registered to go to that. I believe it does require registration in advance, so I'm not sure if there's still seats available, but sneak in anyway. We'll help you out. Probably shouldn't say that. But we do have that, so if you are interested in contributing to Node, there's quite a few Node core contributors here at the conference. Reach out, let us know, and we'll help you through. We always love to have new people. So that's it. Thank you.